Welcome to Let's Talk Death, conversations to inform and inspire. Let's Talk Death is a series of conversations with some amazing people from various fields. Our goal through these conversations is to normalize, educate, and demystify the taboo around death, dying, and the journey of grief. Hello, welcome to this episode of Let's Talk Death. I'm Fran Solomon.
I'm Andy McNeil.
And we are thrilled to be your host for these conversations. Let's Talk Death is brought to you by Heal Grief, a social support network creating community after someone has died. Everything we do is inspired by our core belief that no one should ever grieve alone.
Our goal with this program is to have a friendly chat with some amazing people so we can help normalize and educate our Heal Grief community. Our guest today is Scott Huffaker. Scott is an entrepreneur, banker, investor, and musician. And born out of the death of his son, Scott is also an author of his newly published book, Lost Arrows: Coping with the Death of a Child. Scott considers himself to be an ordinary guy who has had some extraordinary experiences that have allowed him the insight he shares to questions such as, why do I feel so alone? How long will I be broken? Will I ever be myself again? Just to name a few. Scott, his wife Tammy, and their two youngest children live on the Gulf Coast. He is the father of 6 children and 3 dogs. So Scott, we are delighted to have you as a guest on our show.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm just elated at what you folks do. So thank you for what you do.
Scott, thank you. Before we speak about your book, may I ask you to first share your son's life and then the events that led to his death?
Sure. So he was born in 1989. And immediately when he was born, unbeknownst to us, even though the technology, even at the time, we didn't know what he had any birth defects, but turned out that he actually had 5 heart defects. He had what was called tricuspid atresia, which is 3 chambers versus 4. He had, his heart was upside down on the wrong side. He had pulmonary stenosis, which was partial blockage of the artery that goes to the lung, and he had a hole in the top of his heart. And so immediately when he was born, it was eventful, to say the least. Truly, I never expected him to live past 10 or 12 years old. At the time, what is an interesting story is that he, when he was diagnosed, one of the doctors said, he's not a candidate for a heart transplant because of all the abnormalities that he had. And so they said, the best that we can do is when he's 3 years old, we can do a procedure called a Fontan, which is where they go in, they take the heart out of the body, and then they try to rework it as best they can. And that worked. That worked till he was 21 years old. Well, that was Dr. James Kirkland that said that. And so when he was 21, he was really about on his last leg, trying to survive. And but 20 years later, they felt like he was a candidate for a heart transplant. So they actually found somebody that was a donor. Something happened, an accident happened. I was never sure, and he never wanted to actually know who it was. But anyway, he was able to get a heart transplant. But what's interesting about it, that it was Dr. Kirkland's son that actually did the transplant. So it was pretty amazing. And so he was 21. He lived about 10 years longer after that. And so that's kind of what happened. He was a great son.
Yeah. Well, Scott, I do see that it hasn't been too long since he died. And
Right.
I wonder, as far as uh, what really motivated you to write this book and write it so soon, so quickly.
So I'll tell you why I wrote it first, and then I'll tell you why I felt like that I had some answers that, that probably normally in these circumstances you wouldn't normally have. So September, I think it was around this 27th. I'm sure, a lot of your audience and y'all possibly as well have seen the show on TV, NCIS, with Mark Harmon and those guys. So
Yeah.
there was an episode that was the second episode of this current year, and so Gibbs, who is Mark Harmon, he hadn't seen his FBI buddy Tobias in quite a while, and so he was doing a stakeout with on a serial killer. And so Tobias gets in the truck with him, and he said, Tobias, how are you doing? He said, I hadn't seen you in a while. He says, well, I'm doing great. He says, well, that's good. He said, Gibbs said, are you still doing that counseling thing with, I can't remember the coroner's name in there right a second. Anyway, with Palmer. And he said, yeah. He says, actually, it's really good. He says, actually, you should go with me to the next meeting. He said, and then Tobias starts to actually berate him for continuing to work and really throw himself into his work and hide himself from, what he considers voids. And he says, what are you talking about? I don't have voids. He said, yeah, you do. He says, Gibbs, you and I are like twins. He says, we've both lost wives. He said, more than one. We both lost jobs. And he says, now I've joined your club. I've lost a child. And Gibbs says, that's not a club. He said, it's certainly not one I would sign up for. He said, but what would you even call it? And he said, they've got a name for people that lose their spouses. They're called widows or widowers. And they've got a name for people that lose their parents. They're called orphans. He says, but there's not a name for people that lose their children. And threw me against the wall. And there really isn't anything in the English language that actually spells that out. There's an old Sanskrit word called Viloma, which means against the natural order. And, again, that dates back, thousands of years ago. But that's the only thing. And so that's what prompted me to write the book. Okay. So why did I feel like that, I had some things, and I feel like, I'm sad a little bit and crying a little bit today, but for the most part, I'm doing pretty good, I think, and I think it's because I have had some experiences, like I said, some extraordinary experiences. So back to 2000, Dylan was, I guess, 11 years old, and his mom and I got a divorce. Initially, I didn't get to see him or my other two children for 4 years, or talk to them or anything. And then I did get to see Dylan on his graduation night for probably a couple of hours. And then after that, it wasn't until he had his heart transplant and he was in the hospital, and she wouldn't even let me talk to him in there. There was, there was a lot of strife, a lot of things that happened, a lot of not good things that, a lot of not good things that happened, which, I really couldn't force the issue. And court wasn't an answer. I was getting no help there. So I went another about 7 or 8 years that I didn't see him again. So in all that, I feel like I was being prepared for today. Even though I couldn't see him, and I know that there was hope. I knew at the time that there was hope, that one day, hopefully I could see him again. I wasn't able to. I couldn't talk to him. I couldn't see him. I couldn't communicate with him. So, obviously he wasn't passed away, but I wasn't part of his life. And so it helped me I had to learn how to cope. I just had to learn how to cope. And so it led me to a lot of the things that I share in the book, about how I feel like, you can cope through some of those things when you don't have somebody in your life. And so, that's that's why I felt like I had some answers and I wanted to share. And I delved into some other and did some more research, and some other things happened after he passed away that helped me as well. So anyway, that's
Yeah.
kind of the long and the short of it.
God, I want
Yeah.
to go into some of the questions you
Sure.
say you share your insight with.
Sure.
Taking the first one, why do you feel so alone? So what is it that your experience tells you was the reason you felt so alone?
Well, no matter who you lose, whether it's a child or a loved one, period, they're a part of you. You're a part of them. And when you lose somebody like that, you lose a part of yourself. So you just feel alone. I don't know any other way to say it. You just, they were a part of your life. They were a part of, what you did, how you functioned, what motivated you, all the joy and the happy that goes along with that, even the bad times, it was a part of your life. So you feel like you lose part of yourself to a certain extent. So you feel alone,
Yeah.
you feel disconnected from that person.
Yeah, and then you say, "How long will I be broken?"
Yeah, and that's a tricky question, Fran. Yeah, and you know that. I mean, so I think there's a lot of things to say about that. I think um, I think there's
How do you
ways to
address it in the book?
how do I address it in the book? I think there are ways that you can migrate to a more functional you, and that's what I like to to say it as. You know, you'll never fill that void, but I think there are things that you can do that you can migrate to a more functional you. There's things that I wish that I had thought of now that I could have gone back and put in the book that I realize now that I feel like, one of those things is, unfortunately, society um, sometimes, maybe intentionally or not intentionally, creates within us a victim mentality. For instance, and I'm not criticizing anybody here or passing judgment, but how many times do you see billboards about attorneys wanting you to call them because you had an accident or you had something bad happen to you, and it almost rewards that victim mentality. Even we get in school and stuff, we get graded, and not that there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but at the end of the day, everybody has value and purpose, and everybody is unique in their value and purpose. And so I feel like that there's some of those things, because of that, it's very easy for people to get stuck in the grief mode and not migrate to a more functional you.
Yeah. It's interesting you say it that way. I've had, I don't know how many people, and even people just gain that insight when they're in a support group or even in counseling sessions. I've had people just come to this epiphany to say, I, as difficult as it is, I've been trying to just get rid of the grief. And at the same time, I have not been allowing myself to, as you said, to function in a healthier way, and realizing, wait a minute, I'm trying to do the wrong thing. I can't get rid of the grief. I have to find ways to cope with it and to walk with it and to somehow assimilate that into my life. At the same time, I also have to allow myself to continue to move toward health. And that's hard, and it's difficult because it's sort of like this conscious choice. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
choosing to grieve, but
Mm-hmm.
it's this conscious choice to get up, to move, to step outside, to do the things that will do that for you. I even have people who will say, I don't even take care of myself anymore because I don't feel like that I can.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like everything then spirals, in a
Right.
person's life. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And
So,
I think I'm sorry, Fran.
no, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I do want to make sure I get this last question in.
Yeah, sure.
Will I ever be myself again? How do you answer that? How do you address that in the book?
again, I think it's migrating to a new you. I don't think you'll never be the person that you were with them, um, uh, totally. But in saying that too, I think, one of the things too is that grief, and I'm sure you all agree, grief has been um, turned into try to be a compact, um, not viewed as what it really is scenario. Part of that has been, cancel culture is nothing new. Okay. It's been
Yeah.
here since the beginning of time. And so, the plague really started part of that. It's where the word even quarantine came from, which everybody's heard that word over the past couple of years. Um,
Yeah.
and so, there was a time, and this is not a faith-based book, and I talk about that. I mean, I do talk about the Bible, but it was never my intent to try to force that on anyone, but just to look at it from a historical basis. I mean, when Moses died in the Bible, the Jews mourned for 30 days. And it says in that particular scripture in Deuteronomy that was the allotted time. And um, and the Jews today still pretty much embrace that same policy. They mourn for 30 days. If it's a parent, they mourn for a year. But there's things that they do. They celebrate life. And you know, I think the biggest thing, and what I was going to say a while ago, is that we have to always remember that our loved ones uh, wants what's best for us. Just like what we wanted the best for them. They want the best for us. They would not want us to continue to, like you said, just crawl up in a ball and not do anything. They would want us to continue on, because again, everybody has value, everybody has purpose, and whatever that is, that's what we need to escalate to.
Well, I tell you, this is we're almost out of time. I know it seems like it went quick, but it goes
Right.
fast. But I do wonder, before we end our time together, um, people who listen in to our podcast will often want to know, how can we connect with your guest? How can we where can they find your book? How do they make those connections, Scott?
So Sunday will actually be Dylan's birthday, and so that's when I'm releasing the book. And so it'll be available on Amazon, on in Kindle, in audio, and also in a paperback. So they can reach me there. I will have a website up by the weekend. Currently, though, they can reach me at lostarrowsbook at gmail.com. And I'm glad you brought that up too, because two of the things that I do hope to accomplish, and I don't know, maybe we can all talk about it at some point, is to, do some of what you guys are doing virtually, but more importantly, I mean, community is huge, and y'all know that. You're doing it all the time. You know how much value that brings. And I want to have some physical groups that are dedicated to people that are, have lost children. And then I would like to seek to try to make some sort of, again, not that we should be victims, but I think anybody would agree, and not to minimize any loss of any loved one, but I think losing a child is certainly different than losing another family member. And again, I'm not diminishing anybody else's situation, but it is different.
Yeah. Agreed. It is a unique experience that, when you're able to be with others who have experienced the death of a child, there's a connection there that you just don't have with other people who haven't had that loss.
Mhm.
It's something you can't understand unless you've lived it.
Right.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah. Scott, we want to thank you so much for being a guest here at Let's Talk Death, and for sharing your son Dylan's life, and for sharing the inspiration behind your book. We thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And again, I thank you for what you guys are doing too.
Thank you. And thank you to those joining us for this episode of Let's Talk Death. If you would like to learn more about Heal Grief, please visit us at healgrief.org. At healgrief.org, you can learn more about all the programs and resources of Heal Grief, including our national network of support for grieving young adults called Actively Moving Forward.
And if you know of a bereaved adult, refer them to the AMF app, where adults of all ages connect with others experiencing a similar death loss. And last, make sure you sign up on healgrief.org to receive our newsletter for links of future episodes of Let's Talk Death.
And so again, with that, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time on Let's Talk Death.